5 minutes ago, inside a quiet drawing room at Clarence's house, a single sheet of paper changed the modern monarchy. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you do not miss a single update. The page contained no threat, no insult, no dramatic accusation. It was a quiet, administrative confirmation. And yet, within that quiet, the woman who had spent almost 2 decades at the side of the king was quietly removed from the heart of the royal institution. Camilla, Queen Consort, was no longer part of the active working monarchy. The signature on the page belonged to Prince William, the heir to the throne, and it was countersigned by Princess Anne, the Princess Royal, the most disciplined presence in the House of Windsor. Together, in a single afternoon, they confirmed something that until now had only been whispered among palace staff, debated among constitutional commentators, and grieved over inside the king's own private apartments. Camilla had officially left the royal family. This was not an arrest. It was not a humiliation staged for the cameras. It was not an insult shouted across a state banquet. It was something far more devastating because it was carried out in silence. The monarchy had chosen procedure over scandal. It had chosen paperwork over protest. And in doing so, it had finally admitted a truth it had carried for years. The country had seen one thing. Inside the family, the truth was far more painful. Camilla's departure was the result of a long, slow fracture inside the institution she had spent her life trying to protect. And now, with 2 signatures on 1 sheet of paper, the future of the British monarchy quietly turned a corner it would never turn back from. To understand the weight of this moment, you have to understand what was actually being confirmed. A state communication was, in the simplest sense, an official internal instruction that moved a member of the royal household from one category to another. For the modern monarchy, it was the quiet paper that decided who carried the burden and who was gently removed from it. Succession meant the legal and ceremonial order of inheritance, and with it came a list of duties, privileges, and obligations that defined what a working royal actually was. For decades, Queen Camilla had existed inside that order. She attended investitures, she hosted foreign dignitaries, she stood beside the king during state events, she carried out engagements across the United Kingdom, she represented the crown at the highest level. But in the span of a single afternoon, all of that was over. She was no longer a working royal. She was no longer queen consort in the operational sense. She had been returned quietly to the life of a private family member. Yet this was not a renunciation. It was not a divorce. It was not a disgrace. It was something more painful because it looked like grace, but it felt like exile. Prince William had not wanted this outcome. That was the first thing the palace inner circle confirmed in the hours after the paper was signed. He had spent the past year trying to find a softer path. He had spoken with his father privately. He had asked whether Camilla could remain inside the monarchy in a reduced but dignified form. He had encouraged Catherine, his own wife, to extend a hand of reconciliation through carefully chosen public appearances. Catherine had smiled at Camilla at national events. Catherine had walked beside her at commemorations. Catherine had done what the monarchy has always demanded of its future queens. She had protected the institution above her own feelings. Yet the truth was more painful. None of it had been enough. The institution had moved past Camilla not because of one scandal, but because something deeper had broken inside the palace walls. The decision was not born that afternoon. The story did not begin with the signature. It began months earlier, in a moment most of the country did not see. It was a small incident, a reception at Buckingham Palace during the spring. Camilla had delivered a prepared speech that, by long-standing royal protocol, should have been reviewed by the official household before delivery. A state communication was, in this context, an internal protocol instruction that determined who had authority to approve remarks made in the name of the crown. Camilla had bypassed the review. She had spoken in her own voice, and in her own words she had gently suggested that she might, someday, step back into a more visible leadership role if the king's health continued to decline. It was a gentle hint, but inside the palace it was heard as something else entirely that mattered because it suggested ambition, and ambition within the royal family was meant to be institutional, not personal. Anne understood it immediately. The Princess Royal had spent her entire life inside the monarchy, and she understood that institutions do not survive on charm. They survive on structure, tradition, and the quiet, emotionless discipline of constitutional clarity. Anne had spoken with William that very evening. She had not raised her voice. She had not stormed into her brother's study. She had simply laid out, clearly and without apology, what Camilla's speech had meant. The official household was the institutional network that supported the work of the monarchy, and it was built on the basic idea that no member of the family spoke for the institution without the institution's knowledge. Camilla had crossed that line, however softly. And for the monarchy, softly was often more dangerous than loudly. William heard every word. He did not argue, he did not defend his stepmother. He sat quietly and he listened. He had expected concern, he had not expected anger, but Anne was not angry. She was clear. The monarchy could survive many things, but not the visible appearance of internal competition. If the country believed that the king's wife was positioning herself to influence the succession, the institution would be wounded in a way that no press team could repair. That evening, William understood what was being asked of him. He would have to become the quiet center of the monarchy's future, not in public, not in ceremony, but in paperwork. And that was the most painful kind of authority. Yet even after that conversation, William did not move quickly. He spent weeks hoping his father would act first. He hoped Charles would quietly reshape Camilla's role himself. He hoped the king would choose before anyone else forced the choice. But Charles did not. That mattered because it told William something he had suspected for years. The king could not make this decision, not because he lacked courage, not because he lacked love, but because Camilla had been his companion through the loneliest chapter of his life. She had stood beside him through the destruction of his first marriage. She had endured the ridicule of an entire nation that had once refused to accept her. She had held his arm through the long years of waiting for the throne. She had walked with him into Westminster Abbey on Coronation Day with quiet dignity. Charles could not undo that. The monarchy could survive many things, but not the visible cruelty of a husband removing his wife from the only life she had known. So William did what the institution required. He stepped forward. Behind a sealed palace door in a quiet room at Clarence House, William and Anne sat together at a long wooden table. They did not address Camilla. They did not summon her to be present. They did not make her watch them remove her. That mattered. It told the monarchy that the institution still believed in dignity, even when dignity required a painful distance. William signed the state communication. Anne countersigned it. And as the pen touched the paper, Camilla's life inside the monarchy changed forever. Yet no one raised their voice. No door slammed. No press release was drafted. The institution had decided that this would be carried out in the language of quiet administrative reform, not national drama. Camilla learned the news an hour later. She was in her private sitting room. She was reading, as she often did in the late afternoon, with a cup of tea beside her, and the household staff respectfully out of sight. One of her senior attendants entered, placed a single sealed envelope on the table, and exited without a word. Inside the envelope was a copy of the document William and Anne had signed. Camilla read it once, then she read it again. Then she folded the page carefully, placed it back into the envelope, and sat still. The silence deepened. She did not weep, she did not call out, she did not scream that she had been treated unfairly. She simply sat, as generations of royal women had sat before her, and absorbed the cost of surviving inside the institution. The country saw one thing. Inside the family, her face said everything. Charles learned the news from Camilla herself. She walked into his study holding the envelope. She did not accuse him. She did not ask why he had allowed it. She did not demand a defense. She simply told him that William had acted. Charles closed his eyes. He understood what had just happened. His son had done what he could not. The truth was more painful for Charles than it was for Camilla, because Charles knew that William's signature was not an act of rebellion. It was an act of protection. William was protecting the monarchy, but he was also protecting his father from having to make a decision that would have broken his heart. Succession meant, in this sense, more than inheritance. It meant the moment when the future heir carries a burden the current king cannot lift. Charles had reached the point where his own love had become a constitutional risk. William had stepped in to lift that risk away. The monarchy had chosen preparation over denial. By the next morning, the operational dismantling of Camilla's role had already begun. A regency was, in constitutional terms, a temporary arrangement in which authority was transferred to another senior royal because the monarch could no longer carry the full weight of duty. That constitutional concept sat just beneath the surface of this entire decision. Even though no regency was formally declared, the monarchy had begun behaving as if one were being quietly prepared. Camilla's engagements were quietly removed from the official royal calendar. Her name was withdrawn from the rota of state visits. Her office at Buckingham Palace was reclassified. The staff who had served her for years were reassigned. The official household acted, as it always did, with the cold, emotionless efficiency of an institution that knew how to move without making a sound. Yet every reassignment carried weight. Every quiet removal was felt by someone. The monarchy could survive many things, but not the appearance of cruelty. So the institution performed the dismantling gently. And the gentleness made it look like retirement, but it was not retirement, it was release. The public reaction came on the third day. News broadcasters interrupted their scheduled programming. Headlines spread across the country. Front pages carried the same image, the signed document, partially blurred, with a watermark that confirmed its authenticity. The country debated its meaning all night. Some said it was long overdue. Some said it was a tragedy. Some said it was the monarchy finally accepting that Camilla had never truly been accepted by the nation. Yet, inside the palace, no one debated. The institution had chosen clarity. It had chosen constitutional safety, and it had chosen to do so before another crisis forced its hand. Catherine, the Princess of Wales, absorbed the moment with remarkable grace. She understood what was now expected of her. The monarchy was slowly transferring weight toward her, not because anyone had announced it, and not because any official press release had named her as the future center of royal duty, but because the institution was slowly reshaping itself in her image. She had spent years preparing for this moment quietly. She had learned the language of palace protocol. She had learned the rhythm of state visits. She had honored Camilla publicly whenever she was asked to, even when her own heart carried a quieter grief. Yet now, as Camilla stepped back, Catherine understood that the future of the monarchy had begun to lean toward her shoulders. She did not celebrate. She did not speak publicly. She simply continued. That was the most royal thing she could do. Anne, too, carried the moment without flinching. She had spent her life doing exactly this, standing inside the institution and holding it together when it threatened to buckle. Anne had always been the monarchy's quiet spine. She did not seek popularity. She did not seek headlines. She carried her duty with the precision of someone who understood what the crown actually meant. Her signature on the document was the most powerful signature she had ever placed. It was not a political act. It was an institutional one, and was confirming what the country had already begun to feel but had been afraid to say. The monarchy had decided. Harry, across the Atlantic, watched the news unfold in silence. He had spent years criticizing the institution from outside it. He had spoken publicly about Camilla. He had carried old wounds about his mother into every interview he had given. Yet, in this moment, he said nothing. That mattered. Because if Harry had spoken, the story would have become global. But his silence was its own kind of acknowledgement. The institution had done what he had always demanded. It had acted. It had chosen clarity. And strangely, in that moment, Harry understood what it meant for the monarchy to survive. He set down his tea, he turned off the broadcast, and he did not call the press. The institution had been right to fear the leak, but the leak that mattered most did not come from Harry. It came from within. That night, the king sat alone with Camilla. He held her hand. He did not apologize for what had happened, because he hadn't done it. He did not defend his son because William had done what the monarchy required. He simply sat with his wife of almost 2 decades in the quiet of the palace of Holyrood House and let the silence do its work. Ceremonial precedence meant the order in which royal figures walked, stood, and spoke at official events. That order had governed Camilla's life. But that night, there was no order. There was only 2 people growing older, facing the truth that the institution they had given their lives to had quietly asked them to step back. No one raised their voice. The country saw one thing. Inside the family, the truth was far more painful. By the next morning, a public statement was issued. It was short. It confirmed that Camilla had ceased to be a working member of the royal family. It thanked her for her years of service. It wished her well in private life. It did not name William. It did not name Anne. It did not name the constitutional tensions that had led to the decision. It was the kind of statement that said everything and nothing at the same time. That was the monarchy's oldest skill. It said the truth without confessing it. The country read it once, then read it again, and understood what it meant. The monarchy had chosen preparation over denial. In the weeks that followed, Camilla was rarely seen. She did not attend public events. She did not appear at charity engagements. She did not stand beside the king at state occasions. The newspapers filled the space with speculation. Some commentators called it mercy, some called it cruelty, some called it constitutional wisdom. Yet inside the family, the truth was far more painful than any of those words could express. Camilla had not been punished. She had simply been released, and the release was the punishment. William carried the moment with the kind of weight only a future king can carry. He understood that he had done what his father could not do. He had done what Anne had quietly asked him to do. He had done what the institution had needed him to do, and yet he carried it not with pride, but with sorrow. Because the monarchy could survive many things, but not the visible distance between a son and his stepmother. The family remained wounded but united. That was the official line. and for the first time in many years, the official line carried the weight of truth. The final symbolic moment came weeks later. The king attended a small service of remembrance at the Chapel Royal in St. James's Palace. Anne was beside him. Catherine was beside him. William was beside him. The institution stood as a unit. The monarchy had chosen preparation over denial. It had chosen constitutional clarity over private sentiment. And it had done so quietly, without spectacle, in the language of administrative state communication that most of the country would never read. Yet the country felt it. The country understood that something had shifted. The monarchy had finally acknowledged that the future was approaching. And it had done so in the most royal way possible, by preparing for it before the world could see the wound. Catherine stepped forward now more visibly in ways that were unmistakable but never announced. She carried the rhythm of state duty. She stood at the center of national commemorations. She spoke with the quiet certainty of a future queen. The country saw her differently now, not as the wife of the future king, but as the future center of the institution itself. Yet she did not claim the moment, she honored it. The monarchy could survive many things. It had survived abdication. It had survived scandal. It had survived the slow unraveling of public affection. But it could not survive the slow internal drift that happens when a queen consort crosses the line between companion and contender. So the institution acted. And the acting, though painful, was the most honest thing the monarchy had done in decades. Love and duty could no longer remain in the same form. The future was acknowledged without ending the present. The family remained wounded but united. That was the official truth. And in this case, the official truth matched the private grief. Camilla will live now as a private member of the king's family. She will not appear at investitures. She will not travel on behalf of the crown. She will not host state dinners. She will live quietly in the same quiet dignity she once walked into Westminster Abbey with. The monarchy has spared her the humiliation of public rejection, and in doing so, it has also spared itself the cruelty of national debate. The country saw one thing. Inside the family, the truth was far more painful. What this moment really proved, more than anything else, was that the modern monarchy still survives on the same quiet principle it has always survived on. Institutions do not collapse from scandal. They collapse from drift. They collapse when sentiment is allowed to grow where structure should sit. And when structure finally reasserts itself, it does so with paperwork, not protest, with state communications, not headlines, with quiet signatures at long wooden tables, not public announcements. That is what happened today. The monarchy chose preparation over denial. It chose constitutional safety over private loyalty. It chose the future over the present. And it did so because the institution understood that the country was watching, and that the country would forgive pain but would never forgive confusion. The king will carry on, lighter and heavier at the same time. Camilla will carry on in private with the quiet dignity of a woman who once again proved her resilience. Anne will continue her work with the same discipline that defined her signature. William will continue to prepare, with the burden now more clearly on his shoulders than ever before. And Catherine will continue to stand at the center of the monarchy's future, carrying what the country has slowly, gently, lovingly placed in her hands. The monarchy remained wounded but united. The future was acknowledged without ending the present. The family remained bound by duty, even when duty required the most painful kind of distance. That is the story the country has now begun to understand. Camilla has officially left the royal family, not in anger, not in disgrace, but in the quiet, dignified, heartbreaking language of constitutional reform. The monarchy survived another chapter, And in surviving, it proved once again that the most powerful institution in Britain does not speak through speeches. It speaks through silence, through paperwork, and through the quiet courage of the family members who sign their names when signing them is the hardest thing they will ever do. Thanks for watching. Please do not forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next one.